Hello and welcome to the final part of this advanced cleanup series. My name is Ben Brownlee for Boris Effects. And when we're doing cleanup like this, there are some occasions where procedural techniques can't completely finish the job. And that's when we come in and use manual techniques. We're going to be diving back into Silhouette, and we're going to be focusing on paint, auto paint, and grain management, using all of these techniques to complete the shot. Okay, welcome back. We're going to be focused now on our paint node and trying to use that to hide any last imperfections that we've created with our InPaint. And to help us out, we have obviously the ZMatte Alpha we created in the last section. So let's pipe that ZMatte into my source one on the paint. Let's add in a couple of dot nodes using the Alt or Option key just to add those in across the connector lines, just so we have a clear line about what's going where. There we go. Now, before I start paint, I want to talk about grain management. Now, we've talked about the importance of this in the first part of this session, and it's exceptionally important when we're dealing with paint that we have our grain under control. I'm going to show you the different color channels that we have just to show you the issues that we've got going on at the moment, and it's especially clear in the blue channel. We have our very grainy original plate, and then all of the smoothing that we've done with the InPaint just drops out completely. So we take a little look at everything here. You know, that's where we're seeing the big differences between these two. So let's degrain our original plate. Where should I put the degrain? Well, we could put it right after the input, and then that would degrain everything, including the key, which might be a good idea. But because the key we've got already is actually kind of fine and it's blurry, adding a degrain up there isn't going to help us out, but it is going to mean that we have to calculate that degrain before we do the keying. So let's not do that. Let's put it instead before the InPaint. So just to show you what grain nodes we've got, well, I'll come into the nodes and search here and just type in grain. We could do the same thing just with the tab key. And in the plugin version of Silhouette, which we're working in here, we have degrain, grain, and grain composite. If you're working in the standalone version of Silhouette 2022 and above, you have the Sapphire grain tools there as well. But because we're in the plugin, we only have these three tools. So I'm just going to use regular degrain. Going to pipe that in there, and let's come back to our blue channel. I can switch between the channels either by coming up to the channel selector at the top or by going Alt or Option R, G or B. Red, green, blue. And now what I've got is a bit of a balancing act between trying to take out some of the grain without everything getting too blurry. And different grain tools are going to handle this particular task differently. So if you have other grain tools that you want to use, feel free to use them. But I think this is going to be enough for us. We're not trying to get rid of every bit of grain. We're just trying to make our life a little bit easier when we start using some of the paint tools. And we've got a huge advantage for us as well. Because our subject is a bit out of focus anyway, we can be a little bit harsher with the grain tool than we otherwise might be. There we go. And so the advantage of putting the degrain just before the InPaint is because this is being calculated procedurally, we don't have to redo any of our work here. This is just going to look, fine, just with less grain. All right, so let's pop into Paint now and actually define what it is we're trying to do. And really, it's two jobs. The first one is just to try to smooth off and try to keep these nice folds looking natural. The other thing we need to do is obviously get rid of the last two letters that we weren't able to do with the InPaint, so LA. And we have a variety of paint tools with which to do that with. I'm going to use one tool, and that's my drag tool. Let's make sure I've got overlay turned on so that we can see the paintbrush. Let's zoom in. And what the drag tool is going to do is it's going to take the pixels from where I click and hold, and it's going to smooth those down in the direction that I draw. Let's do it so we can see it do it over here. So you can see that's what it's doing. Click, drag, smears those out, and it gets fainter the longer we drag that up. And how does that work? Well, we've got the mixture of our mix, which is how much it's mixing in, and we have our decay, and our decay is how long it takes for that drag to decay. So if I take this down to 50, click and drag, you see we don't get very far. If I take this to 60, click and drag, see we get a little bit further. Take it to 75 or 76, click and drag, you can see we're getting further. Take that all the way to 100. I can just keep dragging, I can just keep dragging every day of my life, da da da. Yeah, so it's not going to decay at all, so I can just click and drag along there. Let's take that back to 90 for a second. The other thing that we can do is control things like the spacing as well. So let's take my mix up to 100, and you might be able to see we get a little bit of spacing, a little bit of stepping with that brush. If I change my spacing down now, half that to 10, you see I don't get as much stepping as I did previously. So undo that, take my spacing up. Duk, 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 duk. You can see I get big, long, heavy spacing there. I'm going to leave the mix and decay at the default values of 50 and 90. The only thing I'm going to change is the spacing. Just be aware that spacing, can cause more pressure on the processing as we're dragging through. So I'll take my spacing down to 10. I think that looks nice. The spacing here becomes almost indetectable. And I think that's going to be good. You can see the long spacing really well when we zoom out. Okay, let's delete this frame. Yes, I don't want to have any paintwork on there at all. The other thing we want to be careful of is to not affect the helmet. So if I just do a regular click and drag over the top, oh, look at this, I'm affecting the helmet. Well, we don't want to do that. There's a reason that we came and did all the keying stuff and all the alpha stuff to the helmet, and that was to protect it. So how do we do that directly within the paint node? Now, the secret is down here, Obey Alpha. So if I click Obey Alpha, I can choose an alpha source. So it's going to be source 1 because that's why I've piped in my ZMAT. And let's have a little look at source 1 here. And there's the alpha channel for that. Okay, let's go into my output again. Hit A a couple of times to turn the alpha overlay off. And let's just paint in a color. So with the Obey Alpha turned on and my alpha source set to source 1, I can only paint within the alpha channel. Not exactly what we want. In fact, it's exactly opposite of what we want. I'll undo that. If I go to invert alpha now, that area is going to be protected. And that's what we want. Let's undo a couple of times. So now when I go to try and drag things over here, I can be dragging wildly and I'm not affecting the helmet. The helmet stays in its original form. Very nice. All right, let's do this properly. Let's delete any paint strokes I've already done. And let's just come in here. I don't want to be that close. Let's just take a little look. So with the drag tool turned on, just going to click and drag a few times, not even very heavily, but just in the direction of the creases, just to smooth those creases out. All right, lovely. Let's zoom in a little bit just to see if I can see any more edges, and I can there. Let's take my opacity of this brush down a little bit. Just a few little streaks there. Great, happy with that. And I'm making my strokes all in one direction as well to try and keep a little bit of consistency. I think that's going to be fine. Let's take a look at the before and the after. A before and after. Yeah, so that's just helped to smooth things out a little bit. And now I've painted on one frame. We need to do that for all the frames. Coming back to Ben's hierarchy of speed. If we can do things procedurally, let's do them procedurally. And that's where Silhouette's auto paint comes into play. So every stroke that we have created has been saved in our paint history. And that means that I can now replay all of those strokes across all of the frames and get the same look across all the frames. I'll set it just so it's on the work area. I'll try to auto paint now. Go backwards. And let's see what happens. I'll stop that there. I think we're going to get the idea here. It's going to do something, but it's not going to do the right thing. If we play that back, it's going to almost look as if the areas that we painted, let's see that pop on, yeah, kind of, well, they're not moving. So we're just getting streaks sat there in the same position of the frame. That's not what we want. I'm going to undo that. And Silhouette's going to eat up all of that auto paint that it just did for me. Thank you very much, Silhouette. So how do we get this right? Well, we have a yellow data input into Paint. And that means that we can take in tracking data or transform data from other layers that we've already done. Let's recycle that data we've got in Paint, because we've done all the tracking on the shirt already, yeah? So I'm going to pipe that in, and now if I come to my transform down in the paint section, I can choose my transform to go to the shirt track. So I've now said I want to use the shirt track when we're going to be doing auto paint. So let's click on the strokes that we want to auto paint again. I need to do one more thing. Amazingly important, very easy to forget. Turn on match move. So this is now going to match move these strokes to the current transform layer. Let's play that back again now. So now if we play that back, we can see that those same drag marks that we made have been copied across the entire image. Now, so at this point, you look at it and you go, okay, well, does that do what I want it to do? I think yes, it does. You know, there are some areas that are maybe like they've been dragged out from areas of shadow. We want to change that. Well, how easy is that to do? Very easy. Just going to undo again to get rid of the auto paint. And let's come to the frame we have painted up. Let's come in here. And I'm going to come to my stroke tool. And it's this stroke tool here where I can select different strokes. So maybe this one here. So maybe these four here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And these were the ones that were taking in a lot of the shadow. And you can see they're highlighted in my paint history. So I can get rid of these ones by clicking on the trash can, delete, and it's going to ask me to rebuild that frame of data. So I'm going to rebuild that. Okay, very nice. Is that looking good still? Yes, it is. Then I can redo the auto paint across the area there, and I think that should probably help me out a little bit by not taking in quite as much of that shadow area. Lovely, and I don't mind that. So if we wanted to, we could come in and do another round and just sort of, yeah, pick up some of the lighter colors, but I don't mind that. I think that looks all right. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on fixing this area down here, and we're going to use the same drag tool again. But first, I want to talk about a little trick that I like to use whenever I'm doing paintwork, and that's found under the display options up the top. So we used this earlier when we were playing around with gain and gamma, but we have this nice little LUT drop down where we can choose our own .cube LUT. Now, if you're working with the standalone version of Silhouette, you'll also have Sapphire installed. And in Sapphire, we have an effect called Color Fuse. And Color Fuse uses LUTs. So if we go into the Sapphire LUTs folder, so we have CF, Color Fuse, Stylized, False Color. Let's hit open on this. And this gives me a false color LUT so that I can see whether we've got any sort of areas that are sticking out and not looking like the surrounding pixels. And this is exceptionally useful when we're doing this kind of work. If you're using the plugin version of Silhouette, there are other false color LUTs that you can find online, I'm sure, but the Sapphire one is lovely and tuned for this type of work. Okay, so let's close up our display for a second and let's paint this up. We've got a new thought, so let's hit plus to create a new state in the paint history, and let's just come in and drag these out. I'm going to go from the top and work my way down. And the reason for that, there we go, let's bring this in here. Yeah, and the reason for that is that remember the helmet's going to come over the top there, and it's going to cause us a lot of strife. We'll try to drag pixels from the bottom, which is going to end up with black pixels. Let's turn my eye off there so I don't have to look at the strokes there. And I think maybe we'll take the softness up, the opacity down, and just try to take some of that out. There we go, lovely. To keep the pattern in from the direction of the shirt as well. There we go. I think that's going to be all right. Let's take a little look, see if there's anything else that sticks out from the other in-paint we've done. Maybe this area here. I think we're going to be all right there as well. Okay, so let's turn off that false color LUT. Set that to none in the display options. Let's go back here. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Yeah, I buy that. Okay, so let's now auto paint this section across the rest of the area. So we only have these new strokes selected. Work range again, and let's just auto paint those forwards and see if we end up with any surprises. And that's not too bad. I mean, the only area that I'd really look for is possibly like this crease down here now, and this crease at the bottom there. So let's find a frame where they're the worst, which is probably around about there, and let's just add another few strokes in. Maybe take the opacity up a little bit, take the brush size up there, just mellow that shadow out, bring that in there, mellow that down as well just a little bit, possibly bring some of this shadow up a little bit there as well. How's that looking? It's not too bad. Yeah, in the original this shadow goes a little bit further down, but I think it's going to be all right. And this shadow shouldn't really exist as strongly as it does, so let's fix that. There we go, trying to keep a bit of depth in there as well. Yeah, that's looking all right. Okay, good. So now we've got our third area. We can play that back either backwards or forwards. It doesn't really matter in this case. Let's play from the back because we're closer to the back. Because we're just using tools like drag and not clone, it's not as mission critical that we paint from one direction or the other. Let's play that back now. Oh, we're losing a bit of the... that's a shame. We're losing a little bit of the shadow that is actually there. Only one thing for it. Let's rebuild that shadow. Don't need it to be quite as deep, but I do want it to be there. Yeah, okay, good. Right, that was just a few more strokes. And let's auto paint that across the rest of the frames. Directly in the middle frame, doesn't really matter where I auto paint that from, I don't think. Let's have a little look there. Yeah, that's better. Okay, great. Well, that's the paint bit done now. And the final thing is just to regrain it. And like always, there's no one way of just doing this final section. We could just regrain the whole plate. And that's definitely something we could do. Or we could just do the like the paint only as well. So I've got a secondary output on here, which is paint only. So I could come in here and just, you know, comp this area up with the original and just regrain this area as well. So we're not using artificial grain across the entire region. Actually, let's do that. That's the more complicated workflow. Like the easy workflow actually would just be to add grain over the top here. Not even grain, actually. I'm going to use the grunge. Let's find one of the presets and do almost nothing. Right, it's one that's called splotches, which turns everything off apart from splotches, which I'm now also going to turn off. That's good, because what I'm interested in is this little bit at the bottom, which is my grain. We can come in and change up the grain amounts here and regrain things there. So that's the easy way. We're just we've degrained the whole plate. We regrain the whole plate again afterwards. The other way of doing it is to just pipe the paint only area out and just use the regrain there. Let's see how that works. So I'm going to need another node, which is my composite node. I've got foreground and a background. So let's pipe the paint through the grain into the foreground, and let's pipe the original plate into the background. Let's make it so we can see exactly what's going on here. And let's look at the individual color channels now. Let's just zoom in a little bit here, and let's go to our red channel. So that's Alt R. And our grain section, we can now change the grain amount and sort of manually match that in on the different color channels. So that's Alt R for red, Alt G for green. The green, like, there's a bit of softness actually there. Let's maybe bring the softness in. Go back to the red to see if that's changed anything for the amount on the red. A little bit. And the blue, yeah, it's looking pretty matched in there. So that's without the grain, and with the grain, hopefully that comes through. It's going to be a bit subtle to see once it's been through various levels of compression for the screen capture, but that's the general idea. One more caveat with this, actually. The way that paint only works is that it only draws up the section that it needs to try to be a bit more sort of memory efficient, and then we have the alpha channel that's created by the paint strokes that we've made. Because we've got this as part of a bigger composite, so we've got the in-paint coming into the paint. If we look at the composite here, some of those areas that we did the in-paint on, we didn't get paint strokes on. When we look at this, we don't see the paint strokes. If you did want to use this workflow where you're only working your way through the paint, you might want to think about just doing a mask, or you can even come into the paint and use a 0 opacity brush. Like, it doesn't really matter what you do with it, and just fill in a couple of gaps there, even if it's 0 opacity, so it's not actually doing anything to affect the image. That's going to be enough to make sure that those areas are going to be rendered out. And of course, just auto paint those through the rest of the frames. And we've got our final shot. But just to emphasize, that's only if we're taking the paint only area out. If you're regraining the entire plate through output, you don't have to worry about that. Cool, so that is our t-shirt done. I can save that and output it if I want to, or if we're working in the plugin version, it's one more thing to check. So I'm going to exit out of here, and if we take a little look at what's going on the output, let's zoom in a little bit there and just make sure we're seeing, well, let's look at the blue there. You'll notice that we're not seeing the regraining that we did. Why is that? Well, this is something that people overlook. They'll probably only overlook it once, but let's get that number down to 0. And that's what Silhouette is rendering out. We can set it instead to render out the composite, and that's going to bring our grain management back in. So that's going to render out everything all the way up to the output. And that's going to make that look correct. So we just render that into RAM and everyone's happy, especially the woman in the checkerboard top. She's going, oh yes, that is a great paint job that you've done there, Ben. Of course. Thank you, woman in checkerboard top. So there's the before, there's the after, before and after. Of course, we can extend that out, do transitions to make it draw on, or use Mocha's Power Mesh to come in and do a t-shirt replacement, whatever you want. But that's the general overall workflow to get advanced cleanup happening on materials where there's a lot of folds and objects that are crossing over the image. And just one more shout out to Ben's hierarchy of speed. Anything that we can do procedurally is going to make our life easier. In this case, we started with doing the major amount of removal here just with InPaint. So it meant we could do things like easily animate the angles of folds as it moves through the frame and give ourselves good tracking data at the same time. Also procedural was our keyer. So doing the main bulk of our work with the keyer to separate out the helmet from the t-shirt, and then work in holdout mats and garbage masks to do the rest of the work that we needed to do. Importantly, we also recycled. We recycled the shirt track layer in the garbage mask. And then finally, we did our manual work in the paint. Again, recycling shirt track to help drive everything with auto paint. So we only had to draw on one frame and auto paint that across the rest of the frames. And we did that 5 separate times just to do cleanup where it needed it. We also saw the importance of grain management when it comes into paint, degraining before we do the paint and adding grain back in over the top afterwards. I hope you found this interesting and you've learned some new techniques that you can take with you and use on your own projects. My name is Ben Brownlee for Boris Effects, and I'll see you again in another Silhouette series very soon. Bye for now. Thanks for joining me so far. We have hours of other Silhouette training available now at the Boris Effects website, and if you want to download a free trial version of Silhouette or any of the Boris Effects products, simply head on over to borisfx.com.